Hello and welcome to Network Insights from Move Consulting. Network Insights is our opportunity to speak to the amazing people who make up our network and for them to share insights into their work to supporting people to be more physically active. Today's episode will feature Anna Lowe, Associate Professor at Sheffield Hallam University and Programme Manager at the National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine in Sheffield. Together, we're going to explore the concept of making it easier to be active and highlighting some of the great work she's been involved in. So, without further ado, let's get going.
Hi, Craig. Thank you.
Not a problem at all. It's great to have you here. So, essentially, to get us kicked off, one thing that would be really important to do, and I'm sure you'll be able to go on for a very long time, but can you give us a little bit of a potted history, if you will, of your background and your passion and interest in this area?
Yeah, sure. Yes. So I'm an associate professor at Sheffield Hallam University, and I'm programme manager for the National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine here in Sheffield. I started out as a physiotherapist in the NHS and did many years working in clinical practice. I then moved into healthcare education at the university and then into research. And my current role as programme manager has two main parts to it. So one of those is overseeing our whole systems approach to increasing physical activity in Sheffield, which is called Move More, and I'm sure we'll touch on that at points today. And then the second part is overseeing some large collaborative applied research projects that are all related to physical activity.
Now, you mentioned a key term within there about the work in Sheffield, whole systems approach. One of the things at Move Consulting that we look at is supporting organisations to understand how to apply kind of physical activity behaviour change into the work that they do. And we hear this phrase, it's relatively new on the grand scheme of things, the idea of taking a whole systems approach. How would you define that? What do you mean by whole systems?
Yeah, well, I think the whole systems approach has come about as a response to our improved understanding of the complexity of physical activity and physical inactivity. So we know it's hugely complex, and we know that the range of factors that influence whether somebody is active or not sort of spans every aspect of life, and we know that these complex problems don't respond to sort of nice, neat, linear thinking. So we need to embrace the complexity. We need to recognise all of those different factors. And we really need to take on board the fact that there is no simple solution. There will never be a silver bullet for this. However hard we try, we won't find a silver bullet. So the whole systems approach really embraces that approach and looks at the complexity, looks at the whole range of stakeholders that are involved, looks at all the different influences, and really tries to create a coordinated response, accepting some of the features of systems working that we can't really control, that things will interact in different ways that can't always be predicted, things will emerge across the system, that it will feel chaotic, and that it can't be sort of boxed and coxed in the way that you might with other large programs of work. So there is definitely that feeling of needing to embrace a bit of chaos and complexity. So it's a very different way of working, and I can see what you say, Craig, about trying to sort of increase capability for whole systems approaches. I can see that that's a really important part of your work, and it's something that we think about a lot in Sheffield because it is a different way of working, and it requires people to come together around a shared vision and to buy into that and to relinquish some control really, and to try and work together. And so our role, my role, and the small team that I work with, our role is to coordinate, connect, convene across that system. But we don't own the physical activity agenda in Sheffield. We don't control it. We just try and support its development and help it to thrive and help it to be productive and impactful and ultimately reduce inactivity in Sheffield.
Yeah. We talk about whole systems in loads of different ways, and one thing that's really important is making it kind of, well, with anything that's related to behaviour change, making it resonate, and how do you get across what that is? And I use similar terms. Silver bullets don't exist. There is no one solution that will help. And added to that, within what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's that notion that a solution or a group of solutions delivered across a program of work over, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, it's not a fixed point in time. So the solution itself over the longevity and lifespan of a program may stop working and needs to be nuanced. And it makes me think of previous conversations we've had as part of Network Insights. Dr. William Bird at Intelligent Health, and they operate, which you'll know very well, they deliver the Beat the Streets program in Sheffield, or have, and the test and retest and iterative process that they go through, it's never based, as successful as that model is, never based on an assumption of this works and we know it works. It's worked before, let's try it here and see what we need to check and challenge and change, and that's really important because life is messy.
Absolutely. And places are different, systems are different, aren't they? So you drop an intervention into one place and it works brilliantly, you drop it into another place, and for a whole range of reasons it just doesn't take off and it doesn't catch in the same way. So I think it's recognizing all of those factors, and also the breadth of the stakeholders that are involved as well. And some of those stakeholders at face value you might think don't have anything to do with physical activity, but actually physical activity can be a really important part of a solution for those stakeholders. So it's a really complicated, at times chaotic environment to work in, but it's incredibly interesting and enjoyable because we get to interact with lots of brilliant stakeholders across Sheffield, and it's hugely varied as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned in very short some of the projects that you're involved with, either at the National Centre or in connection with Sheffield. Do you want to share a little bit more about either of those? You mentioned about the physical activity programmes that are moving.
Sure. So we have a number of physical activity projects underway in Sheffield at the moment, so I'll pick up on one of those first, and then we also have some sort of national research projects that we lead through the National Centre as well, so then I'll move on to an example of that. So I'll talk a little bit about empowering communities. So this is a Sport England funded project that we've been working on in Sheffield with Sport England for I think we're just starting our 3rd year now, and it was really recognising the fact that what we've just talked about, Craig, the fact that that place is incredibly important and communities are different, and one of our core principles or ways of working in Sheffield is about working with people and finding solutions with people, rather than sort of applying our own thinking to other people. So we've got this really strong commitment to co-creation and co-production, and empowering communities really builds on that. So we didn't really know what it was going to look like. It's been a very iterative process, but it's basically been around putting some human resource into communities to work with communities in a way that works for them, and to try and build capability around physical activity and capacity around physical activity within those communities. And so we've been doing that within an area of Sheffield that is less affluent and has a number of challenges, but also has a wealth of assets, and in every sense of the word, and a really strong sense of community, and a very active community hub as well. So we have colleagues attached to that community hub who are embedded within the community and working with key trusted community members to look at actually how can we increase physical activity in this locality. What do you need? What do you want? How can we help you to do that in a way that is sustainable, and won't just fizzle out when the project ends? So that's been a really great piece of work, and we built in a lot of evaluation capacity into that project as well. So there's been some really great learning coming out of there, and we have plans to scale that up across different localities within Sheffield. And I think where we're up to now with that project is that we have tried to hand over the investment and the control to small community groups so that they have control over how this develops. And we've got 16 community groups that are very, very different in their size and nature, but they are all involved and have received funding through this investment to think about how they can build capacity and capability in the community in a way that works for them and for their organisation. And they're not all physical activity community groups either. We've got, for example, there's a really small community group that supports people through substance misuse and rehabilitation after that. And physical activity is or can be part of a solution to that, although you might not think about that at first glance.
Yeah. A lot of that is ringing true with conversations that we're having with organisations as well. Given a point in time of this recording, yesterday, from when we're recording this, which is the 2nd of March, we facilitated a consultation around essentially taking an asset-based community development approach to applying physical activity kind of programming in a way. So very similar to the processes and approaches that you're taking with this piece here. And one thing that really stood out to us, it's kind of a point on reflection, but when it comes to supporting people to be physically active, it's sometimes a huge barrier is the perception of what that means. And we don't have very clearly, in terms of resonance with general population, that idea of the 5 a day that we have for fruit and veg. We have physical activity guidelines, but essentially that's kind of the dose rate for the benefits that come from being physically active. It's not tailored for, as we know, preaching to the converted, Anna, those infographics and that information is tailored for the healthcare professionals to convey messages about. So the perception around what does it mean to be physically active is a huge barrier. And a great piece of learning that we found around that empowerment piece is not to necessarily promote the concept that physical activity is this thing over here that you do and you're not yet doing it, because that starts you from a zero baseline and really low confidence. Whereas if we can support people to understand where they are already being physically active and what physical activity means to them, and then grow from there. So what I really love in the approach that you've defined there is that bottom up, let's grow something that adds value to what you're already doing, because it is too common. We've said it for years and we haven't on a huge scale actually responded to what we say. We've always brought the program and delivered it in a community versus nurtured it from the ground up. So that helicopter in phrase that we hear, it makes it harder to be active, because it's, oh, here's the active people coming in and telling us what to do, and that kind of socialist view of people will do things to us. And it's really empowering to have that ground up and people taking time, programs and organisations taking time to listen. Have you found that's been a similar vein, those organisations that have come forwards to take ownership of the programme and sustain, as you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what you're saying really resonates, and I think these are communities that have been so challenged and so hard hit by COVID, and in many ways, and physical activity is way down their list of priorities, and we know if people are experiencing food poverty, if there's domestic violence, then talking to people about exercise is just it's a non-starter. So I think understanding people's lives, understanding what's important to them, and there's some really interesting research around how we can sort of tailor our messaging, because you mentioned the messaging, the high level messaging around physical activity, how we can tailor that specifically to those sorts of communities, and the sort of language that we use is really important, and we shouldn't assume that the language that we're comfortable with resonates with other people. So there's all of that sort of foundational exploratory stuff to be done. I agree with you, that sort of baseline messaging, or like the five a day isn't there with physical activity, that the infographics are great, they're really helpful for healthcare professionals, but they were never intended for a public audience, and those sort of snappy one-liners aren't embedded in our psyche in the same way they are for other health behaviours. So I completely agree with that.
We're quite jargony if we use the royal we, the kind of sport, physical activity, fitness sector. We're quite jargony in the language that we use, and even to that point of we've got physical activity, exercise, sport, training. It's kind of like what do all these things mean? And they make absolute sense, kind of, to those that are engaged in it. But if somebody really pushed me, I wouldn't be able to tell you what the difference is between exercise and training. By definition, I'm sure there's something out there, but it raises that bar, or raises that barrier of, it's now not easy to be active because I might be doing loads that could raise my confidence and my feelings of self-efficacy, but I don't actually know what I am doing, if that makes sense, in terms of I don't realise that I am actually more active than I might feel, or I am more active than I actually am. So it's a tiny component part, it's a granular part to that individual, but from a programme level, massive themes from there around that, build from the ground up and use that insight and apply it.
Yeah. Sorry, absolutely. And I think if we go in banging the physical activity drum, often we just switch people off immediately because it's not part of their world. Whereas if we can spend time talking to people in communities, getting to know them, getting to understand their experiences and what really matters to them, and then we can start to think about how physical activity is part of a solution to some of those issues. And that seems to be a much more acceptable approach.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned some of the work that you're doing as part of the National Centre. So firstly, we've mentioned, talking about jargony, the full title, National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine, Sheffield.
Yeah,
snappy. One. So yeah, you mentioned a research project that you've been involved with there. Tell us a bit more about that one.
Yeah, sure. So the National Centre, we in Sheffield, we lead a number of research projects at a national level, and the one that I'd like to just talk about a little bit is called Easier to be Active. So again, this was commissioned by Sport England, but we've worked very closely with colleagues at Sport England and at Office for Health Improvement and Disparities as well. This particular project kicked off in March 2020, so literally within days of going into our first lockdown, and the background to this project was really trying to shift things around the existing inequality between people with health conditions and people without health conditions. So we know that anybody with a health condition is sort of twice as likely to be at least twice as likely to be active, or twice as likely to be inactive as people without health conditions, and that's a pervasive inequality that we have failed to shift. And we know, going back to our conversations before, Craig, we know about the complexity here and the range of factors that influence that. And our brief for this project was really to look at a system level, so not looking at individual factors or motivation or sort of personal a personal focus. It's much more a system level analysis of what is upholding this inequality, what needs to shift, and how can we start to take steps to making it easier for people with health conditions to thrive in our physical activity system. So that was the brief. It was about looking at the existing inequality and how we can start to create more of a friction-free experience for people with health conditions. So as part of that, because of the system focus, it was always going to be really, really important that we had a very strong voice of people with lived experience of health conditions. So that was an absolute imperative at the outset, and we really wanted to look across the breadth of the sector of the system and make sure that we were really considering this from every angle, given that we know there's many stakeholders that influence people's physical activity journeys.
And for clarity, has that project gone from start to finish? Is it like we were talking about before, iterative and carrying on? Whereabouts are we up to with regards to that project?
Yeah, well, the project's been carried out in three main phases. So the first phase was really we termed it a national conversation, and we went out via an online platform. We worked with Clever Together to gather a whole load of views. We created seed questions and about whether people were active, about what works, what doesn't, what's easy, what's not, and gathered a whole load of data and information through that. We then made sense of that, looked at what we had, and looked at where the gaps were. And we then, for phase two, conducted a whole load of semi-structured interviews with system leaders, just to sort of reflect what we'd heard from the first national conversation, to reflect that back to them, and to really make sure that they were having the opportunity to help us understand what we were hearing and to refine what we heard. And then at the end of phase two, we got to the point where we had some high-level findings that we were reasonably confident about, and we then went into a second national conversation where we reflected those back and asked people to check and challenge and deepen our understanding of what we were hearing. And that was where we recognised that in phase one, we didn't have as much representation from people with health conditions as we'd have liked. Phase two was very much about system leaders. So in phase three, we worked with Richmond Group of Charities and various other stakeholders to really ensure that we had very strong input from people with lived experience, and that gave us confidence that gave confidence in our findings. So we're now just approaching the sort of dissemination phase where we really want to share this with the world. We're doing a pre-launch for all the stakeholders that were involved, and that's going to be on the 22nd of March, and then we will be launching the final resources on the 23rd of March. And this we never wanted the outputs to feel like an academic exercise. We want these to be practical resources that people can take into their workplaces and use as reflection guides, really. This is what this is what the sector, the system has told us, and how does this apply to our work, recognizing that this has relevance across a whole range of organizations and individuals and groups. So watch this space. 23rd of March onwards, those resources will be available.
Yeah, brilliant. And the spooky irony, I believe, you mentioned right at the start that the project kicked off right at the beginning of lockdown. Yeah. I think it was 23rd of March that Boris made that announcement that we all had to stay at home. So I can appreciate it's been a massively complex project in its own right, research project to complete. But yeah, that additional headache of asking people how active they are at a point where they've just been told not to do.
Yeah.
Although there were benefits where that was a sustained message from government in relation to be active, there are benefits to it. And we've seen so many things that have come out in the last 2 years in relation to that, connected directly or indirectly to this concept of supporting those with long-term health conditions to be more active. Very well known, and a number of people that are watching may already know and have awareness of the We Are Undefeatable campaign, which is one part of the puzzle in terms of supporting people with positive messaging and peer support to a degree, role models to identify with, that being active is possible. So when we talk from a physical activity behaviour change perspective, it's the social opportunity. People like me are active, and here are some of the ways to do it. And then we have the more recent release of things like the consensus statements on risk around being physically active with a long-term condition, research and findings such as easier to be active from your side of things. And if I can add in, from a Move Consulting perspective, we're at the moment working with Loughborough University, so the National Centre in the East Mids, to review exercise referral pathways. But one thing that we're not jumping to conclusions, we're listening to our prospective audience. We fully see it that connotation that comes with exercise referral is now much broader, considering I think it was 10 years ago that the original concept and toolkit that exists connected to that project was there. The landscape has changed, people's views have changed, so it'll be picking up on the findings and the learnings from things like easier to be active and applying those in practical terms. What I'm defining here, just in case it's not completely clear, we mentioned earlier on a systems approach. It's this idea of lots of little things that all chip away at the same and try and remove friction. I think that's the concept. If we think about in simplistic terms, a nice smooth pathway from inactive to active, if that is the journey, if it can be that simple and easy, I guess. Would you agree, Anna?
I would completely agree. Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of this, speaks to Sport England's strategy, doesn't it? Uniting the movement and the ambition to connect health and well-being, and that's not just about healthcare. It's about community access, and it's about people living their lives and having access to stuff that helps them to manage their health conditions and prevent future ones. So it's hugely important. And just to drop in a couple of other things that will be coming along, with another hat on, we're involved in looking at the suite of initiatives that Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, Public Health England, as was commissioned, including, so that's the Moving Healthcare Professionals programme, including the physical activity clinical champions, moving medicine, active hospitals. So those evaluation findings will be out back end of this year, beginning of next year. So all of this just adds so much insight into our understanding of what the issues are and what the potential solutions are as well.
Yeah, and I think it certainly features as part of everybody's conversations that we're having. Is we mentioned right at the beginning that concept of silver bullets don't exist. There's not one solution that would work, and if we put it bluntly, it's okay to get things wrong. Could be the harsh way of looking at it. Don't expect perfection. Learn and iterate. We've heard this so many different times from different organisations. The positive intent is there, and the motion seems to be moving in a very similar or same direction, particularly across England with uniting the movement from Sport England. That's having a huge impact, and we're starting to see changes there. What a big old question coming your way. What would your hopes be? We've got 23rd of March, findings from Easier to be Active. What would kind of the ideal first steps be beyond that point in time of how people might be able to pick things up? Give us a little bit of a chink of what's coming, maybe.
Well, specific to Easier to be Active, I hope that the tools and resources, there's a suite of them coming out on the 23rd. I hope that they will feel accessible and that they will resonate, and that people will pick them up and use them and take them into their organisations, and that they will stimulate thinking around what they're doing well, where the gaps are, what else could they be doing. So I really hope that there will be practical action at a local level based on those resources. I suppose thinking more broadly, in that space of supporting people with health conditions to become more active, and all of the actors across the system in that space, I think there's loads of brilliant work. But I think it's a huge time of transition. There's always an awful lot of stakeholders involved. And I think as we move towards, the establishment of integrated care systems and them having greater powers and really having the ability to join things up within their footprints, I think that it's an unprecedented opportunity to join the dots. So I have very high hopes that the good work that is a bit fragmented at the moment will come together and coalesce, and that integrated care systems will be the mechanism for making that happen.
Yeah. So in terms of trying to summarise, if we will, our conversation, there are lots of great pieces of work happening out there, and what we'll try to make sure is some of the links to some of the previous work that's being completed by the National Centre and is going on in Sheffield exist below this video. So we'll try and make those as easy and accessible as they can be for you. But don't overlook the concept of when we're reading the research and the learning that comes out that you're starting from zero. There will be some great work going on there. So it's about reflecting on, as you say, Anna, coin it brilliantly well, what's working well already and what can we add value or do even better as a result of the learning that's happened elsewhere. That easy silver bullet solution isn't necessarily always the case, and each environment is different. So what's worked in Sheffield might not work in the exact same form in Barnsley, as an example, but it could. So it's looking at what the need is, and the answers come from those in which you hope the system and the programs will impact upon. It is, to a degree, sounds very easy, but it is very complex. Listen and understand and check for understanding, keep iterating and supporting people to get the most they can out of the programs, both those acting in them, delivering, designing and managing, as well as those taking part and benefiting from the service, I would say. 23rd of March is a key date for us to remember. We'll look out for that with keen interest and make sure that we share across our networks as well. I feel that could be the end of our chat today, Anna. So thank you so much for your time and being so generous with your insights. For those that are watching, if you want to find out more about the Network Insights series, then head to the Move Consulting website, moveconsulting.co.uk, network-insights, where you'll find other episodes in the series and opportunities to get involved. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you next month.